and I'll leave you to do the rest of the introductions of yourself, Anthony, and talk us through.
Okay, very good. Can you see my shared screen?
Yeah, I can see the shared screen. Absolutely perfect.
Very good. Something is going on with my internet here today. I keep getting a little bit of slowdown, so hopefully it'll behave here. Okay, so let me go ahead and get started. I've been a ham for a little over 39 years now, and I've been involved with digital communications for just a few years because they've only been around for a few years for the most part. The slideshow I'm showing tonight is a shortened version of the slideshow, and this is the full okay, let's see if there we go. We got a full page now. This is the full slideshow at tiny.cc/FT8 FT4, and this is the link I sent to you. This is 2 summers ago, or one and a half years ago now, of me operating in Vermont portable for field day, and I'm operating FT8 with my left hand here and phone in single sideband with the radio on the right. Now I'm guessing that many of you have heard FT8 or FT4. If you have not, I'm going to go ahead and, you know what, I probably did not do that before I start sharing, so you probably won't hear this, but I'll see if you can hear this or not. That's FT8. And that's FT4, and I doubt whether any of you were able to copy that in your head. That's one of the things that's required as a computer to do all these modes I'm going to be talking about. So it's one of the fastest growing modes of amateur radio. It's pretty hard to miss because of the distinct sounds. But first, let's talk a little bit about who's responsible for the programs. Joe Taylor, K8ZTtalking, he's a Nobel Prize winner. He's a professor emeritus at Princeton, and he's the main person, but it is an open source project, and there's a couple other people involved, predominantly Steve Frank, and that's where the FT comes from. It's Frank's last name and Taylor's last name. And Bill Somerville, G4WJS, is very involved in the project. There's a couple of myths about FT8, FT4 I want to dispel initially. And first of all, some people think that FT8 requires internet access to make QSOs. That's not at all the case. We'll find a little bit later that it's helpful to have internet access to keep your time synchronized, but there's many other ways to do that. Other people think that no operator is required. You can just set up a station, walk out the door, and have it make FT8 contacts for you. That's not really the case, although you might be able to make it sort of look like you're doing that. And other people say no operator skill is required. And I'll show you that that's not even the case. Sometimes there's a few things that can help you greatly. And some people say, well, there's no homebrew or kits available for digital, and I'll disprove that with some slides I'll be showing here. And that only new radios can be used. You can use any radio that has the capability of using single sideband. Your results may vary somewhat, but there's not necessary that you only use a specific type of radio. This is my shack, and not only do I operate radio here, but I do a lot of other things on my computer. And when I'm sitting there, FT8 is almost always on, or FT4. Right now, FT4 is actually on in the shack, and it's my multitasking mode. Originally, when I was using JT65, it was took a lot longer to make a QSO, so I actually had time to get up and go get a cup of coffee and come back. Not quite that much time with FT8 and FT4. So why do I do FT8 and FT4? I operate predominantly QRP. I'm approaching 90,000 QRP contacts. No one told me as a novice I wasn't supposed to start out with a 2-watt radio, but I've been continuing that process. One of the things as a QRP operator that I've discovered very early on is you want to take advantage of opportunities to present, especially to make contacts and especially to work DX. So I've gotten involved in contesting over the years one way. But you'll notice that FT8 and FT4 have allowed me to work some bands that I don't normally work as much. Notice, for example, on 60 meters, 98% of my contacts are on FT8, FT4. And what we call the work bands, quite a few of my percentage of my contacts are FT8, FT4. I've I'm very much appealed by the fact of working 160, but I have a very marginal antenna. It's just a little sloper here, about 60 foot long in my back garden. And I'm running my 5 watts, but it's been very helpful to run FT8 and FT4 on 160. I had a stretch this last winter where 5 evenings in a row I worked a new European country on FT8 160. So it was a really good winter, and I'm hoping for a repeat of that again this year. So far, my best DX on 160 has been the ZS UA0. And what I thought initially was an S51 turned out to be an E51 in North Cook Islands. So that was a nice surprise. On the other end of the spectrum, on the high end of the frequencies, FT8 and FT4 are great for working what are sometimes referred to as dead bands, especially when E-skip is going on. So I've worked quite a bit of 6 meters, 10 meters, and 12 meters, even though we're at the bottom of the sunspot cycle, by spending time on FT8 and FT4. And I actually put together a little article. By the way, when you go to the full presentation, anytime you see this little chain link icon or you see a serif font, that means that there's a link there that you can click on for more information. So that's why you're going to want to go to the full presentation. In just 3 years during the sunspot low, I've worked 214 because I've now worked another country this last month. I worked 4U, 1 UN, so I'm up at 214 DXC countries with FT8 and FT4. Got over 15,000 QSOs. I've worked 8 bands, worked all states, 5 watts with FT8. And I need 5 more contacts to complete 11 band worked all states. Here's the 213 countries. The 4U is not on this chart yet because I made this chart before I worked it. One of the things a lot of people find out with FT8 and FT4 is if you have antenna restrictions, in the United States we call them HOAs, homeowner association limited things, where they don't let you put outside antennas up, or you're using an attic antenna or a portable antenna. FT8 and FT4 are probably the best modes to work because of their ability to work with weak signals. And one of the portable antennas some people use is a magnetic loop, and they work great, but there's a problem when you're using them for most contacts, that every time you QSY, you change frequency, you have to retweak the antenna. They're very narrow bandwidth, so you're constantly retweaking the antenna. Well, in FT8 and FT4, you plop down on one frequency whenever you change bands, and you pretty much stay there. So they're an ideal combination of FT8 and FT4 with a magnetic loop antenna. Here's my QSO percentages by mode, and you can notice that I operated both CW and single sideband, about 2/3 CW, about 1/3 single sideband, a little bit of RTTY thrown in there, a little bit of PSK31. But then I start working JT65 in 2016. It became about a quarter of my operation. It shrunk down to about 1/8, but that was replaced by over a quarter of my operation of FT8. And you notice in 2018, a much higher percentage again, and then we see this yellow coming in with FT4. And here's the progression. Here's my amateur radio HF career from 1981 to 2015. And then you look at 2016 to 2020 are drastically different, and my overall over 1983 to 2020, I'm still predominantly CW, but over a quarter of my contacts are now from these newer modes, even though they've only been around for a few years. Now, the software that's involved in operating these is WSJT-X. There are a few other programs that are based on this, but we'll be focusing on the WSJT-X software suite for this talk. And it includes many modes, JT65, FT8, FT4, but there's other ones such as FT4 and 2 new modes that just came out this week in release candidate in a beta software. They're predominantly used for the quite low bands of 630 meters and I forget the other bit, 220 meters, the low frequency stuff. these modes can allow you to decode signals that are decibels below the noise floor. Sometimes you can even have successful exchange of information without actually being able to hear the signal audibly with the human ear over the noise. And to help accomplish this, they also added redundancy to the data such that all of the messages may be successfully recovered even if some bits are not received by the receiver. Your call sign is sent multi-times, or your exchange is sent multiple times during the time period that you're transmitting. One of the things, messages are typically either decoded correctly or not decoded at all. So when you get a signal, it's not like you mistake one of the letters. You're pretty much going to have the call sign right, or you're not going to be able to decode it at all. One of the things that helps in this process is to have a tight synchronization of the time of all the stations operating. And you can do that through an internet connection, or you can do that as I do in the field with a GPS type of receiver. So FT8 came out in June 29th of 2017, and it quickly pushed JT65 out of the picture because JT65 took 1 minute, whereas FT8 was 15 seconds of transmission. And actually during that time period, that transmit cycle, you're transmitting for 12.5 seconds, and there's 2.5 seconds of computer processing going on. Last year in April, when FT4 came out, it cut that again in half. So we're talking about a 7.5 second interval for the transmission time. So a typical QSO on FT8 will take about 1 minute because you transmit back and forth between the two stations 4 times, whereas on FT8 it'll take about a half a minute. This is just an indication of the differences between the ability to pick signals out of the noise. On single sideband, you need to have a signal that's pretty much about 10 dB above the noise to be able to reliably get all the information. Drops down quite a bit for CW, but FT8, FT4 are much lower than that. This is a quick picture of the screen that's in the operating in the FT4 mode of WSJT-X. And we'll go through this in detail, but we have windows here of the stations being decoded and the stations we're working. What can WSJT-X do? Well, it can automatically log the information into an ADIF file. So when you click on the log button after you've made a contact, it's automatically logged, so you don't have to write it down and into your log. You can easily transfer that electronic log to Logbook of the World or EQSL. So you will find that typically the number of QSLs you get electronically for these digital modes are much higher percentage than what you would get when you're working people on single sideband or CW, where they have to put the information into the log and then go through getting it electronically transferred. It also lets you know very quantitatively how strong the signals are in dBs as opposed to our 5-9 or 1 through 9 scale that we use for traditionally using an S meter on our radio. It works with almost any single sideband radio, including VHF and UHF radios. Now, what can WSJT-X not do? Well, the first thing is it's a horrible rag chewing mode because you get to use 14 characters each transmission. So just think about it. If you want to carry on a log rag chewing session with someone and you only get to use 14 characters at a time, you'd be there a rather long time. So what people have done is they've taken the basics of the software and they've modified it into another program called JS8 Call, and that's a conversational mode that uses some of the same techniques as WSJT-X. A lot of people also use PSK31, which is a whole different mode altogether for more keyboard-to-keyboard chatting, which you cannot do with WSJT-X. You cannot work FT8 or any of the WSJT-X modes without a computing device. You need to have some sort of computing device. You can't copy it in your ear. There's no radio with a built-in decoding built into it. You cannot do it with a CW-only radio because what you need to do is transmit a variety of different tones. So it's not capable to do it with an unmodified CW radio. And you cannot work a station without an operator. I'll show you an example of that in a few minutes here. Oh, actually, it's right here in the very next slide. Last winter, actually in March of last year, I was up at, let's see what time this was. This was at 6:28 UTC, so it was rather early for me, or late as the case may be. And looking at this software, PSK Reporter, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, it shows all the stations that are hearing my signal and that are connected to the internet. So in this case, there's a station down here at DP0, the German station down in Antarctica, that was hearing my signal at -6 dB. And this is my 160 signal, again, with my little sloper, so I was just excited as could be. Unfortunately, I called them numerous times, but there was no one sitting there at the station. So even though it was being copied for 20 minutes, unfortunately, no one was there to reply to my call sign. So that's the one that got away. So that's pretty much what it is and why I do it and what it can do. What I want to do next is talk a little bit about actually setting your station up. So what I want to do for a few minutes here is pause and see if we have any questions on the part that I've covered so far, and I'll be happy to take questions and answer those before I talk about actually setting up.
Okay, brilliant, lovely. Thank you, Anthony. Good start. So anyone got any initial questions to Anthony before he moves on to the second bit of his presentation tonight? Because I can't see all the videos easily. If you want to just unmute yourself and speak, that's absolutely fine.
Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, Nick. Yeah, Anthony, thanks for that. Interesting. You said about the significance of the F and the T. What's the significance of the 8 and the 4?
Oh, the 8 and the 4 have to do with the details on how the signals are put together, the bits that are involved in the whole I can't think of the right word for it right now, but the whole way they're
format.
Yes, format. Thank you. The format of what they're put together. And I left all that out. There's a whole bunch of information on that in great detail. If you go to the WSJT-X site, you can read all about how this whole thing works under the hood, or under the boot, as you would say there.
Thanks very much.
Other questions, please. Okay, if we don't have anything else, I'll have plenty of time for some questions and demonstrations at the end, but let's go ahead now and talk a little bit about what you need to do if you want to run WSJT-X in your own station. So you need a couple things. First of all, you need an HF radio capable of single sideband transceive, or a VHF, UHF radio, I guess you could use also. You need a computer. And the nice thing is it works with Windows computers, Windows 7 or later, works with Linux, and it works with OS X software, so you can use a Macintosh. And because it works with Linux, you can also use it with some of the little microprocessors like Raspberry Pis. So you can actually do this with a Raspberry Pi. It requires a Soundcard or Soundcard interface, and some radios have this built into them, and we'll talk more about that. And then you need the software, and all the software I'm going to be talking about this evening is free software. So let's take a look at radios, and I put together a little chart. These are recent radios that are still available in production or were very recently, and these are under $2,000 retail pricing, and some of these radios can be had for under $1,000 when they're on sale or there's promotions going on. The radios on the far left in the green column are radios that have a built-in Soundcard interface. So all you simply need to do is connect the USB cable between the radio and your computer, and the sound card in the radio will be used by the software. So they're very quick and easy to set up for those. Probably the cheapest among these new is the ICOM 7100. Sometimes in the States we actually have that go below $800 in price for a new one. The radios that are listed here, they'll all have this capability of just plugging in a USB cable and using the built-in sound card. The next column, the red column, are radios that are either still in production or recently went out of production that don't have sound cards built into them. You can still use these radios just fine, but you need an external sound card interface or sound card connection to be able to use these radios. So it takes a little bit more to do, but it's not that difficult. The radios in the yellow column are radios that don't have a sound card built into them, but they can connect directly to a sound card in your computer without any type of interfacing. You don't need to have a separate interface. Just connect the audio cables to an existing sound card and you're ready to go. And then the last two here in the yellow are kits that are available. These are single band kits that are available. For $55, you can go with the phaser kits, and you pick one band, and it is a, let me click on the link here and show you what it looks like. It's a single board that's designed for just FT8. And I'm putting together a 20 meter one right now. I've got a few more resistors to pop in the board and it's ready to go. I've already tested it for the most part and it's working, but I got to finish up. I lost a couple resistors when I was building it, so I'm gathering up a few extra resistors. The second one that's listed there is the QRP, guys. It's a double single sideband radio, which there is one slight problem with that. Because of the offset, it's hard to work between two double sideband radios directly, but that would only involve if you bump into another person that was using the identical radio. But again, very inexpensive, and if you like to build kits, a good way to go. Now, you can use any radio that might be around. You don't need to use a brand new radio. I pulled out my old Argonaut 509. This is a radio from 1973, and used a little interface, the MFJ interface with it. Put a little box together so I could get the right connectors, because there weren't connectors available for this, and was on FT4 making contacts in just a matter of minutes. Now, of course, I can't change the radio frequency through the software. I had to still use the dial on the radio to adjust it in, but that was no problem. Once I get on the right frequency, everyone stays in that same area. So I called this the Continued Odyssey of the Argonauts, based on the article that I'd written originally called The Odyssey of the Argonauts. So you can read those again from these links. So this is the software you want, the WSJT-X software, and there's also a couple other pieces of software that you might find helpful. JT Alert and Alarm JT are two pieces of software that work in conjunction with WSJT-X, and they give you more information on the stations you're working, and I'll demonstrate those a little bit later. And there's one is for Windows and one is available for Linux. You also need software to maintain highly synchronized time. Now, if you're running Linux, that's not a problem, but if you're running Windows, you need to add a software syncing tool to your Windows, because Windows software sync itself doesn't keep time accurately enough. Your goal is to be under a second of time sync. If you get under a second and a half or 2 seconds, you can still make contacts, but really the goal is to be within 1 second time sync wise. And then the third piece of software is not something you need to download, because it's actually a website, and that's an online tool for monitoring your connections or the other stations that are hearing you, and I'll demonstrate that also. So in addition, you need a method to generate the audio that you used, either a sound card in the radio, a sound card in an interface, or a sound card that's independent of both of those that you might have either in your computer or an external sound card. You need to have a way to key the radio's push to talk when transmitting, and you can do this in 4 different ways. You can use cat control if your radio has that ability through the software. You can use the sound card interface, such as the Signal Link interface or the MFJ interface, and they have built-in keying capability. You can also use your radio's Vox control, or if you really want to go old school, you can use manual push-to-talk switching. Back in the old days when you had to switch between your transceiver and your transmitter and your receiver before transceivers. So let's talk about setting up the radio first. If your radio has cat control and it has a built-in sound card, you want to first download the driver software to your computer. Do that before you connect the USB cable between the two, or you'll run into all sorts of problems. You need to set the baud rate of your radio, and you may need to turn on the interface depending on the particular model of the radio. Connect your interface to your computer. Determine which COM port is being used by the software. And I'm going to be talking Windows for the most part right now, although these things are very similar for the other computers. And then test to make sure your cat control is working by using another piece of software. There's also some other settings you're going to want to set on your radio, and I have links for specific radios coming up in a little bit later slide here. So these are some of the links that radios I've worked on, but you can find on the internet pretty much instructions to set up almost any radio out there. Most of the changes involve things like changing the bandwidth of the filtering, changing which port you're using, whether it's the port on the back of the radio or the microphone port to input the audio, and things of that nature. I talked about external sound interfaces for radios that do not have built-in sound cards. Probably the three most common are the Tigertronic Signal Link, the MFJ 1200 series, and the Mini Pro SC, which is a UK-based product. There's also a couple other ones, the West Mountain Rig Blaster and XGG Comms. And again, these are available through the links in the full presentation. So if you don't have the first two, the third option is to use an interface that doesn't have a sound card in it. You can either build one or find very inexpensive interfaces on eBay under 10 pounds. Or if you have that yellow column where the radio doesn't require a sound card, you would directly connect it to the radio, to your sound card on your computer. And if that's the case, you would need a sound card, and something like this simple little external USB sound card is one of the things I suggest. One of the things I don't suggest is using the built-in sound card in your computer. It's just too easy to make mistakes and have your Windows error messages going out or your YouTube video sound going out. So I suggest you keep that internal sound card reserved as your default sound card. And I understand in the new beta release of WSJT-X software, it will no longer let you pick the default sound card automatically. You have to go through a bunch of things that you do that's to avoid that mistake. So if you are using Windows, one of the things that's very important is to make sure that the sound card that you're using is not designated as the default sound card for your computer. And some of you that may have already started this may realize that when Windows does an update, sometimes it decides to change what is your default sound card. So a lot of people have experienced problems with their sound card being accidentally changed during a Windows update. So if you run into problems, that's one of the first things to check. You need to install the time synchronization software in addition to the WSJT-X software. I'm using the Meinberg NTP software. A lot of people use Dimension 4. These are all free softwares. And again, as I said earlier, if you're out in the field, using a GPS, external GPS unit with your laptop is a good way to go. I was camping in Delaware a few years ago at a cabin, and we didn't have internet access or electricity for that matter, but I was using my solar power. But every about 3 days, the radio would drift off the time sync, and I didn't have my GPS unit at the time, so I'd have to drive to the local McDonald's, go through the drive-through, get a milkshake, and sync my time while I was there. So now I have a GPS unit, so when I'm out in the field, I don't need to go to the local McDonald's, but I don't get a milkshake out of it for some reason. So you also need to install JT Alert if you want to use any of the helper programs. After you've installed everything, the last thing you need to do is configure the WSJT-X software. In the full version of my presentation, I have a screen by screen showing you how to set each of the setup screens. Once you're ready to start using the software, it's very important that you always make sure everything is connected and turned on before you start the WSJT-X software. It will go looking for another sound card on its own sometimes and end up changing your configuration. So make sure everything's connected and make sure the radio is turned on before you start the software. Some other operating tips. You may need to reduce your power output to avoid overheating your transmitter. Remember, this is a mode that is continuous key down for long periods of time, so your radio may not be able to operate at the same power that it would be able to operate at CW or single sideband with a more intermittent mode such as that. Also, you don't need all that power, but that's something that as a QRP operator I already do anyway. You also want to make sure you turn off all speech processing, noise blanking, all those type of things are not needed, and they actually will hinder your operation as opposed to helping it. You also want to make sure your filters are set for their widest setting. Oh, a couple other things real quick here. If you have multiple radios, you can set up multiple configurations. Or if you have multiple people that use the same shack computer, you can set up multiple call signs. So, because when you're using the software, your call sign is embedded in the software. So you want to set it up so that another person can use it. There's information on doing that on my handout. This slide is sort of getting ahead of things a little bit. This is what happens when things don't work, and it's a really busy slide, but I designed this actually for my friend who just got started. This is a good slide to print out and leave in your shack when you're operating. If things stop working, the things to check first. This was his list so he wouldn't have to call me every time. Check to make sure the Soundcard settings haven't changed. Check to make sure your time synchronization is working. You want all the radio bandwidth filters set at their maximum. Make sure you're in the correct mode of operation. Make sure you're in the correct mode of WSJT-X. If you accidentally choose something like JT65, it won't work the same as FT8. And a couple other things I have to remind you of things that stop it from working. So everything's all set up now, so let's take a look at the basic screen of the program and what's involved. So we start up the program, and the first thing you need to do is choose the mode of operation you want. And you go up to the top of the menu and choose whether you want FT8 or FT4. Then the next thing you do is choose what band you want. And there's a nice little drop down where you can click on the little drop down arrow, and they have all the frequencies for each of the modes preset in the software. So you don't have to remember, for example, that if you're using FT4, that it's 14.080. Sometimes you'll need to take a frequency that's not one of the normally chosen frequencies. For example, if there's a de-expedition, they might want to work in a different frequency to stay out of interfering with everyone else. In that case, you simply click your mouse on this little box right here, and you can type the frequency directly into it, and that'll change the frequency. So in this case, I've clicked on the box and typed in 14.090, which is where the DX station was operating. The next suggestion I have is that you keep these three boxes checked that are in this general area. The first one is to hold the transmit frequency. What I'm going to suggest is you don't want to transmit on the frequency of the station you're trying to talk to. That'll just interfere with things. So you want to hold this frequency that you set as your transmit frequency. And we'll talk about picking a frequency a little bit later here. The second thing you want to do is have the auto sequence turned on. What that does is if you're calling CQ, as soon as your software recognizes that someone has answered you, it'll automatically send them their signal report. And I'll demonstrate that for us. And then the other one is to have the CQ, the call first set, also to answer when someone's calling you on CQ. So I suggest that you have all three of these boxes on unless you have some special operating circumstances where you know to change them. But most of the time, that's what you should have on. As far as picking a frequency, what you want to do is actually take a look at the little waterfall that comes with the software, which I'll show also in a few minutes, and you want to pick a place on the software where there's no one transmitting. You don't want to pick a station that you want to talk to, you want to pick an empty spot. And that way when you're transmitting, you won't be interfering with anyone else, and everyone will be able to hear you. You won't be being covered up by another station. The software I showed a little earlier has a box on the left. This is the box where these are all the stations you're receiving and decoding. So we're hearing these stations and we're able to decode them with our software. Let's just explain what's there. First of all, this little gray bar across here where it says 20 meters, I've turned that on so every sequence, every time sequence that happens, it'll put this little bar across here again so I know that this is the new stations that have just been decoded. So our first station here that I want to point out is this station's calling CQ. You notice we have this E2 here. We also have an N4 and we have a W7. These are all stations that are calling CQ, and you can see the CQ there. You can see their call sign, and then the next thing is their grid square. So that's what they're transmitting. Now you'll notice that even though I marked 4 stations here, they're in different colors. The first one is green because they're calling CQ, but then it's also giving me this gold color that tells me that that's a new CQ zone for me. I've never worked that CQ zone before. Then you look at this one, has a little bit of gray on it. That means that that station's calling CQ, but I've talked to them before. So that's just letting me know not to call them again because I've already talked to them. These ones that are green means it's a station I might have worked before on a different band, or I've worked another station in that country, but it's a new station for me on this band, and I might want to answer them. Let's look at this other one right here, this F5NNAA. What we see here is two call signs. Now the first thing you have to realize is what we're decoding is not the French station, we're actually decoding the Russian station. And this is what he's sending. He's sending F5NNA, I am UA3XHZ, and he's sending 73 to the gentleman. So we're not actually hearing the F5 station here. We might hear them on the other sequence, but we're not going to hear them here. So I can't double click on and work the French station. The only station I'm able to work is the station that I am decoding, which is the Russian station. Once we start working a station, they'll show up on the right-hand box. These are the stations that we're having a QSO with, or we're trying to have a QSO with. So in this case, I'm calling CQ. So here's my call sign, CQ. This is K8ZT, grid square EN91. And this station W8SIC answered me by giving me his grid square in my call sign. As soon as my software has recognized that, and it shows up in red, they'll help me recognize it, I then send him his signal report. And that's where the auto sequencing takes place. I go down through this sequence of exchanges. He sent me back a Roger, you're minus 10 dB here, and then I sent him a Roger 73, and then I stopped the screen capture before you would have seen. He would have sent a 73 to me also, and that would have been the end of this QSO. So you see we started with a CQ, an answer, a signal report, another signal report, and an acknowledgement of everything, and a 73. So that's a typical QSO. Now here's both boxes, both the left and right box, showing you a little bit more. In this case, I'm going to call a station that's calling CQ. So K4IIA is calling CQ. I double click on it with my mouse, and my radio sends to him KA4IIA. This is K8ZT. I'm in Echo November 91. If he hears me and responds, which he did right here, he sends me back my signal report. It shows up in red because he's answering my call sign. I send him his signal report. He sends me a 73. I send him a 73. Now we'll see that on both sides, but over here we'll also see the other stations we're decoding. Over here we're just seeing the station we're communicating with or trying to communicate with. So that's the typical operation. There's just one other thing I want to mention real quick. There are a couple special modes of operation. In addition to choosing FT8 or FT4, we can also choose these special modes by going into the settings. And these are for things such as working contest or working the Fox and Hound mode. And the Fox and Hound mode is something that's used by DX stations. When the station is in the Fox mode, they can work multiple stations during each of the sequences. So they can answer more than one station in that time sequence, and the Hound stations, which are the people answering, can only work the one DX station. So it's something used for DX pileups, and you have to set your station to be the Hound. You don't want to be the Fox because you're not the DX station. But there's also other things for other contests, and you would set those here. It just changes what exchanges are sent. I mentioned a little bit earlier about this website, PSK Reporter. That website lets you take a look at all the stations that are hearing your signal. These aren't necessarily stations you're working. They may not be stations you will work at all, but they're stations that are hearing your signal. And the nice thing is you can set it to tell how strong they're hearing it. So to show up here, the station has to be hearing me, plus they have to be connected to the internet, and they have to be using the PSK Reporter software. Now to use the software, you just click one button in the WSJT-X software and you forget it. That's all you have to do. And it will send out your information of all the stations you receive each time back to this site, and it will display the information for anyone to see. So that's the fast version of the slideshow. I have the full slideshow with 120 slides on it, and this is the link you'll need to get to that, and it'll let you get to all of the embedded resources in the slideshow. This is my contact information in my website and my newest QSL card. This is a scenic railroad that's just a few miles away from me that I volunteer on. This is myself in my uniform. I'm one of the trainmen, that sort of like a conductor in the cars. So what we have time for now is we have time for plenty of questions. Plus, I'm going to actually bring up a live demonstration of the software to show you actual context going on. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for 1 second here. And I'm going to bring up the software. You can't tell that I'm a multitasker by any means here, the fact that I have just a few windows open, including one that doesn't want to close, but we won't worry about that. So this is the WSJT-X software. Let me share the screen so you can see it. This is the WSJT-X software, and right now I'm on 20 meter FT8. I'm going to go ahead and change the mode here so you see how that happens, and I'm also going to swing my antenna around a little bit. So I'm going to go up to the top and change to FT8. Now, first thing you'll notice is down here there's this little timer that shows you what portion of the cycle, transmit cycle, you're in. So you notice when we got to 12 seconds there, it automatically started decoding all the stations that it heard. So these are all the stations that I'm hearing here in Ohio with my antenna pointed towards Europe. And just to show you real quick, here's the time first. The next column is the dBs. Then the next column is the time difference between my time sync and their time sync. And you notice that almost all of these are under 1 second. Now here's one where it's more than 1 second, so it warns me in red that that person might be having a problem with their time sync. So the ones in green are calling CQ, and sometimes people add in more directional calls, like this person's calling CQDX. And we can work these stations by double clicking on them. But before we do that, I had to find a clear spot. And can you see the band? Can someone just let me know whether they're seeing the waterfall or not?
Yeah, we can see that, Anthony.
Okay, very good. So this is the waterfall. What I want to do is all these places where there's yellow, I want to avoid those. So I'm going to pick a spot where there's nothing. I'm going to hold down my shift key and click right there. This is where I'm going to be transmitting at. Okay, and you can notice it changed my transmit to match the frequency here. So when if I would double click on one of these stations, it'll send my signal here. Now, what I don't want to do is send my signal where the station I'm trying to get to. And I just noticed someone else came in here, so I'm going to actually move again because there's someone transmitting there. So what you do is you try and avoid everyone else, and then you call. These are all the stations that we're hearing all the way across about 400 kcs of potential space. You're seeing about 300 of it right now. So I'm going to go ahead and find a strong station. The lower the number, the stronger the station that's calling CQ. And we'll wait for one more cycle here. Notice when we get to about 12.5, they'll start decoding. So I'm going to try calling this Spanish station here, this EA4 station. So I double clicked on it, and over here on the right, it now shows that I sent my call. The yellow is the things I'm sending. I sent my call in grid square to him. It's going to transmit for 12.5 seconds. Now what's going to happen is I'm going to wait for 12.5 seconds to see whether he answers me or not. Whenever you're transmitting, of course, you're not receiving. So it came back and he didn't answer me. So what happens is I have it set up to automatically recall again. So he dropped a little bit, he went up a little bit in signal strength, so maybe he'll hear me this time. I can keep transmitting even if he's talking to someone else because I'm not on his frequency. I'm not going to interfere with him at all. Matter of fact, you can see on the band, on the chart down here, he's down here at a little bit above 10, where I'm up at 18. And again, I called him, and he didn't respond, so I'm going to call him one more time here. And actually, I'm going to stop that after this. So I'm going to uncheck this, and when it's done transmitting, it'll stop at the end of that cycle. So I'm transmitting right now. Okay, so I'm done transmitting. Now I'm going into receive mode, and we'll see whether he answers me or not. And he didn't, so I'm going to pick someone else here to call. It's maybe a little bit stronger. And I didn't call really quick enough there, so we may not get him this time around, but we might get him on the next cycle. So he's still calling CQ, and I answered him again. He's still -3, so I may or may not work him. We'll see. Unfortunately, you see the real strong station here, the CU7 is someone I've already worked, so I'm not going to call him again unless I have to resort to calling the stronger station. While we're waiting, though, I can definitely answer questions if anyone has questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually switch modes here and see if I have a little more success on FT4. Now FT4 takes half as long. It's not quite as sensitive, but because it takes half as long, sometimes you actually have more success. We'll try calling the Spanish station. I'm going to tweak my antenna a little bit here. So down here, this is the helper software I talked about before. This is the JT Alert, and it's telling me a little bit more about each of the stations. And what it's doing here is it's actually using my internet connection to look this information up on QRZ. Okay, so he just answered me, so he just gave me a -8 dB. I automatically start sending my exchange to him because I have the auto sequencing on. And I sent back, he's +8. So he said I was -8, +8. And he said, Roger, Roger, 73. And what popped up then is the screen for me to log him. So I've now made a contact with him.
Brilliant.
I'm going to set this to call CQ, and we'll just let it go through the next cycle and let it see if someone else answers me. So questions?
If no one's got immediate questions, then when Anthony's finished, we'll go back around the room and see. I'm sure people have got questions they're sitting on.
So I was just sitting there, and my hands are up in the air. You notice I haven't touched anything. This station called me, and I answered. And I'm going to give him an okay. So I just made a contact with this station in 9 land. He's in India. I think he was in Indiana. He was in Indiana, which is very close to me. But he's working me off the back of the beam, and I'm going to set this again to enable transmit. Now I'm guessing that one of you may have your radio on and may be on FT8 right now. If anyone's out there, you're welcome to call.
Unfortunately, I have to go down the garden and put the aerial up.
Can I have 2 small remarks?
Yes.
Nick. Hi, Anthony. Good evening. ON8 November Tango here. Thank you for the excellent presentation. I have two things that I do from time to time, which I found useful from a point of view of operating. If you click the CQ only button, or if you click that, you only see the CQ station. Sometimes that's very handy.
And that's right here, everyone.
Yeah. If you click that, you only see the CQ stations and the band activity. And the second thing that I do, which I found more handy from time to time, and generate stations, generate the station messages, I click the second tab, I click tab 2, and then you get 2 columns for sending or receiving, for calling or receiving. And I found this also more practical to operate.
And this is what he means. This is what he means by the tabs right here.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
You may also want to guess that they took that out of the new beta release. They've removed tab 2.
That's a shame, because I really find this very helpful. If you are calling CQ, you only have these 3 options.
Yeah.
Like in the one, you have 6 options, and you know, okay, you are on automatic, but you get a better overview. And if you are answering CQs, you get the other column, and you better see the progression of your QSO.
Yeah. Now, what I'm also using is on the right here. I have this is part of the JT Alert software. It lets you set up macros so you can have multiple things on the right here, so you can use additional special messages. Okay. Again, you're limited to 14 characters, but you can have special messages here.
Yeah.
And the other mistake, why I'm mentioning these buttons, there's the CQ button. The other thing I want to mention real quick here is there's another button over here that says menus.
Okay.
And if you uncheck that, the top menus go away to give you more screen space. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the more common things I have people that when they first start out, they say, I can't change anything. My menus went away. So I'm going to click it back on here again, put the menus back on. But that's very common. I'll have people tell me, I can't change my mode because the menus are gone.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony.
Very good. So as you can see, we can do this. A couple questions I've had in the past is, why don't you narrow your filter down and get rid of all these extra stations? Well, the problem is when you call CQ, you don't know where the person's going to answer you. They might answer me anywhere from way down here to way up here on my band map. And if I narrow my filter down, I won't hear them. So it's very similar to something that predates me by quite a while, and that's when people were crystal bound, and you would call on one frequency and then have to tune your receiver around to find them. So in a way, it's sort of going back to that style of operating. We set our transmit frequency at one spot, just like we have a crystal control, and then the potential is anyone in this band that we hear. The good news is we don't have to tune the radio around because we have our filters wide open. The software will take care of looking at the whole thing for us. One thing that you may want to be aware, though, of is people who are using older radios or radios that don't have as wide of filters in it, they may not be hearing more than 1500 hertz at a time. So it's a good idea, if you're not getting an answer for someone, to get within 1500 hertz of them. In other words, if they're way down here, don't answer them way up here if you're not getting a reply from them, because they might have their filters a little bit narrower, or the bandwidth on their radio may not be quite the same. I'm using a Luscre K8Z, and it has the ability to have up to 4,000 hertz on it of receive area. So there's actually space up here that I might be someone might be up there, and I would be copying them even though it's not showing up on my waterfall.
Are you using a beam, Anthony?
Yes, I am. I'm using a 3-element beam at about 50 feet. Nice.
Your waterfall looks so much less busy than mine.
And I have the beam pointed at, I'm pointing at about 60 degrees, which is a little bit, I swung it a little bit further south than I normally would. I put it back at 50 degrees now. The other thing I want to mention real quick here is when you're looking at the waterfall, you notice that the signals are wider on FT8 than they are on FT4. So that's the other limitation. Even though it's faster, it's not quite as sensitive, and it does take up more bandwidth.
Yeah.
But one of the things I noticed, especially on 6 meters and on some E-skip, sometimes you'll get fading of the signal, and it won't hang in there long enough to make a full FT8 contact, but you will have time to make an FT4 contact. So FT4 was primarily designed as a contesting mode, and a lot of people are hesitant to use it all the time, but I think as people get more used to it, they're going to start using FT4 a lot. Right now, FT4 is pretty much, in the US at least, used mainly on 20 meters and 40 meters when it's not a contesting time. During contesting times, people spread out a little bit. But I've noticed, and I've been trying to convince people to spend a little bit more time on FT4. I'm going to go ahead and switch bands here to just show you how the band changed. I'm going to change the band to 30 meters, and I'm going to change the mode back to FT8. Now, one thing you can't do is you can't decode both FT8 signals and FT4 signals at the same time. Some of you may have been using WSJT-X back in the old JT65 and JT9 days when you received them both in the same bandwidth. So it's not the case now. So they've set up separate band segments for each one so they're not interfering with each other because you can't receive them at the same time. So I'm going to pick an empty spot here. And when you're picking your empty spot, you have to let it go through 2 cycles. Because your cycles are either the transmit even or first or transmit odd and second, you're only hearing half the stations that are transmitting. So the stations we're going to see here are all the stations that are on the odd or second, because I'm set for the even right now for transmit when I start transmitting. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on one of these stations real quick here. Let's see what we're going to choose here. There we go. Try the Jersey station. And I didn't do it quick enough, so we're not going to get in this cycle around anyway. I also have it set up so that once I log the station, it automatically goes into my station log. WSJT-X has a log built into it. It's just an ADIF file that it saves everything in, but I have it set up so that it's communicating. The WSJT-X software uses UDP packets to send information to other pieces of software like the JT Alert or a logging program or a contesting program such as N1MM. Excuse me. Well, it appears that my, oh no, he's, okay, so notice right here, the J0 station just finished working up another station, and I'm still calling CQ because I'm not on his frequencies. I'm still calling him because I'm not on his frequency, so I'm not interfering even though he's working this other station. Now, hopefully, maybe he heard me this time around. We'll see. No, he did not. And it's in pink because it's a new country for me on this band. He's minus dB, so chances of me hearing him are not that great. Let's take a look real quick at the FT8, at the PSK software. This is PSK Reporter. And this software is showing me the stations that are hearing me around the world that are also using internet connections to send the information back. So you notice up here, this OG2 station's hearing me at minus 11 dBs. This other station heard me 12 minutes ago at minus 15. So these stations aren't hearing me with a real strong signal. This station here, the CU7 station, was back on 20 meters. That was the one that was hearing me quite strong. We can change this to look at any time period. So if I look at the last 24 hours, you'll see all the stations that heard me over the last 24 hours, and it'll tell the time. Now, I wasn't on much last night. I'm typically on, here's for a little while on 160, so I was on at 160 18 hours ago. We can also look at another station. It doesn't have to be our call sign. Anyone who's operating that we know that's operating, I can look at their activity over the last 24 hours. I put the call sign in wrong. This is my friend that I just recently set up to operate. He never wanted to do this. He thought this was a waste of time operating these modes because they were only computers. And then once he started working DX, he's worked about 3,000 contacts in the last 3 months. So he changed his mind considerably after he started doing it. And he was on 19 hours ago, so he hasn't been on for a little while here. No, 9 hours ago. This is another piece of software that's very similar. This is called, let me log in real quick here. This gives a list as opposed to a
So, Anthony, when I go
Yes.
onto PSK Reporter, I can see myself being reported pretty much everywhere,
Yes.
but I can't work them.
How strong are the signals you're seeing?
That's a good question. I should have a look.
You can turn that you turn that on through the settings up here,
Yeah.
display options, and then choose the one that says show SNR, and it'll show you show it to you. You can also see it just by hovering your mouse over the one you want. It'll show you that individual one.
Yeah.
The common things, if you're seeing yourself a lot of places around the world, but you're not working anyone else, double check to make sure your time sync is good. That's one of the most common problems. The other thing is, typically if they're hearing you with fairly decent signals, you should be able to work them. So the most common thing that happens that you really don't have any control of is when you're looking at this waterfall. I've been transmitting for a while now, and I thought I was in the clear before, but when I stop transmitting and wait for a full cycle, there might be someone in my cycle that's transmitting at the exact same time as me. So periodically, if you're not making contacts, you want to stop for a few seconds, let one or two cycles go by, and see if someone's now transmitting on the same frequency as you. That's very common. Where
I had this the other way around. I was on 40 meters the other day, and I had 3 East Coast US stations ping me and ask me where was clear on my waterfall that they could reply to me.
mm-hmm.
They on JT Alert. One of the things you haven't talked about is the fact that you can text message somebody that you can hear, and they text messaged me via JT Alert to say, yeah, exactly that, and said, well, I'm pinging you. You can't hear me. Where's clear on your waterfall? And we made contact that way at minus 24 dB, which was great.
What's your call, Russell?
G4ZRZ. No, I haven't been active for 2 days, so unfortunately PSK Reporter won't show you.
I wanted to show them this though. If you notice, when I do use the JT Alert and I put someone's call sign in there, they may not be using the JT Alert, or they might not be even on the internet. So it tells me that they're offline.
Yeah, certainly am.
So you can't text everyone that's here, because not everyone's using JT Alert and not everyone has an internet connection all the time. So don't assume that because you texted them and they didn't answer, that wasn't the case. Now see, this person right here is calling, and I'm gonna double click on him, even though you wouldn't. I mean, this wouldn't be normal if he was having a QSO with someone. You wouldn't bother him. But I'm not going to bother him because I'm nowhere near him on the band map. And he can decode all these stations. So even though he's trying to work this PJ4 station, I won't bother him by calling him. And we'll wait and see after he's done with the PK station if he answers me, maybe. Everyone right now is trying to work this PJ4 KY from Europe.
PJ, where's that?
That's Bonaire, or one of the other, I think that's on Bonaire, or Curacao.
Oh, one of those, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd certainly be piling on that.
So if I spin my antenna around, I'm going to stop transmitting now here. You'll notice that we weren't seeing him transmitting. These are all the stations that are hearing him. Mm-hmm. So if I want to hear him, I have to make sure that I'm listening during the right cycle. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to rotate my antenna, and you'll see that he'll show up on our screen here in the opposite cycle. So all these people were calling him on the odd. He's going to be transmitting on the even. So when this is done down here, we should see that appear. And down here, I can see that I think I've already, let's see, didn't show up. We'll let it go through one more cycle here and see if we see him.
There's GJ again.
Sometimes it gets a little crowded. When I first started doing this, it was hard to get people, and now it's hard to get on and not have a ton of people. So that's why I've been saying I've been doing a lot more FT4 where it's a lot less crowded.
Yeah.
Hi, Anthony. Can I ask a quick
Yes.
question?
Absolutely.
Just in your, I've seen in your band activity and receive frequency panes, you've got the country names listed there. I've never seen that before on WSJT-X. How do you switch that on? Is that part of FT? Is that part of JT Alert, or is that built
Yes.
into WSJT-X?
That's part of JT Alert.
It's part of JT Alert. Okay.
Oh wait, you're talking about up here?
Yeah.
Oh no, you turn that on by going into the settings.
Yeah. Whereabouts in settings is it?
It's on the first screen here. It shows. Oh, I gotta remember where it's at now. You know what? That may be from JT Alert. I don't remember off the top of my head now.
Yeah, I've never seen that before, but that's really useful.
It might be a
It
JT
seems
Alert.
weird to me. If I go on a new band, I just see EU or AS or SA rather, or something for Asia or South America. And then when I start working stations, it seems to switch over to showing me the actual country. I've really no idea why. So I started working 40 meters about 4 days ago. I built a new antenna, and it wasn't showing me the countries at all. Now it is. It's a bit weird.
I don't have GT Alert, and I can see the countries.
Yeah, there's some place to turn it on. I don't remember where it's at.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have a dig, but I thought I'd been through all the settings, but I've obviously missed one.
My guess is that it would be on this first general screen here, but I don't see it.
So just one tip that I found with this is that if somebody's calling CQ and you can't get through to them, is to change your transmit frequency.
Yes.
Because they may have, when you've got a very clear, I'm pointing at my screen here, which of course you can't see. You've got a very clear view here because you're using a beam, whereas I have a vertical at the end of the garden. So my whole spectrum is quite crowded with people coming in from all over the world. And I suspect that a lot of DX stations may be the same. So you're going to try and hop onto a frequency which you hope that they have clear, that they can hear you.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. I'm only seeing the waterfall at my end of things. I don't know what the other end of the other side of the thing looks like. It's like you never really realize how busy that DX station is until you listen to their audio on their side as opposed to what you're hearing. You don't understand why they can't hear you, but all of a sudden when you hear what they're hearing, if you're a recording of there, you understand why they didn't hear you.
One of the things that you can do is put your TX frequency, your transmit frequency, under 1000 Hertz, because the program starts to decode from the bottom.
Yep.
And so your station pops up as the first station he decodes, and that may increase your chances.
That trick worked, but they just switched it out so it doesn't do it anymore. You notice it's now random now. That was my trick for years. That was my trick that I used a lot.
Yeah. That doesn't always work either. So I'm also a member of another club, the Reading Club, which incidentally Bill, who you see his call sign there, G4WJS, he's also a member of, so I often talk to him. But we have a member who is in, because of COVID, is, I'll say, stranded with inverted commas in Slovenia. So he's S5/M0MPM. And I've worked him several times, but the problem is that he has general interference, and it's you can see, he's shared it with me on Zoom and stuff, and you can see from 500 up to about 1200, there's just no hope of contacting him. and so you then have to pick a frequency which is above that, which we've done, and that's worked out. But if we didn't have this facility, you wouldn't know that.
I work with a school near here, and when we try and work FT8 at their school location, when their heating and air conditioning kicks on, there's a line spaced evenly all the way up the band, so we know there's something there we're hearing. By the way, Russell, my daughter went to university in Reading for 1 year.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, fantastic. Yeah.
Back in must have been 2010 or 11, 2012, I think it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But by the way, now when I told my wife who I was speaking to tonight, she goes, "What's that near?" And I was able to relate to her because we've been watching The Last Tango in Halifax, so we know what your area looks like. At least what they depict it as in the TV show.
Well, that's the guys in the north. Yeah.
Yes.
So you've just been called there by somebody.
Yes. This N6 just called me, and if I come down here and look, as I said earlier, I can hover my mouse over this, and it'll bring up details from. I would only dream of the Californian station calling me. He's calling me. Not only is he calling me, but my antenna is pointed at 150 degrees, so I'm 90 degrees off on him.
Don't make me jealous.
That's okay. When you work all those Europeans on 160, I get jealous. So
I'm sure.
In the U.S., it's so different here. From one coast to the other. Like CQ Worldwide, I have a friend who lives out in California, and we don't work any of the same stations for the most part. We work, the biggies, but he'll have a whole giant run of JAs, and I'll have a run of Europeans, and he'll wish he could have got those. But the one thing that you will notice if you do decide to play around with this, it's great for learning about propagation. It's great for getting through when you have a low powered signal, and I literally can come into the shack almost any time of the day, and if I pick the right band, I can make a contact on FT8. There's no dead time where I can't make a contact somewhere. And as I said, this summer, or in April, May, and June, I don't think there's a day that I didn't make a 6 meter, 10 meter, and 12 meter contact almost every day during the sunspot low on E-skip. Other questions?
Can you keep using the old version, because the new version seems to have omitted all kind of interesting things? You can for a little while, but eventually it'll catch up to you. So right now, some of the things are not working on the earlier versions. Right now, the version is 2.2.2, and the new release candidate is 2.3.0, which hasn't been released completely yet. I'm not sure what the release date on that is going to be. But the other thing with JT Alert won't work with some of the older versions. And the other thing, if you interface with a contesting software like N1MM or something like that, again, after a while, they stop working on the newer versions, so they don't want to talk to each other. Can you keep the old and the new version on the same computer with the same radio? You can if you put them in a different subdirectory and make a different startup icon for them. Okay. And that's how you set up two different users too, by having a different startup icon. Okay. But yeah, you can do that. The other thing that some people are doing, there's always people that like to do things to the extreme. There's one person I know that I don't know him that well, but he's running 4 instances of WSJT-X at the same time, so you can listen at different bands, and he's also listening on the time. He's listening on both time sequences. So when he's transmitting, he's trying to listen to see whether someone's underneath him or not. I don't know how he doesn't blow out the front end on his radio, but he's doing things like that, and he's running 4 instances at the same time. That's crazy. Okay, thank you, Anthony. You're very welcome. So I'm assuming that some of you may have worked K3LR before during some of the contests. He's less than 50 miles from my house here. He's just due east of me, and he's one of these super contest stations where they do everything to the extreme. They don't do this sort of thing. They're more traditional in nature, but
he has a very large setup where he does reverse beacon network monitoring, where he monitors all the bands at the house separately and then spits them back out through the spotting network. Well, again, the link is tiny.cc/FT8 FT4, and that has all the slides that you may possibly need.
Okay, Anthony, one more question for me. I read something somewhere, I think it was on someone's QRZ page, and they were bleating on about people not observing correct etiquette as far as FT8, FT4, in that they weren't selecting the optimal odd or even transmit window. And they were basically saying you should try and fit in with those around you in your local vicinity so you don't trample over each other. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, that was designed for one band only, and some people think it should apply to all bands, and it doesn't make sense on other bands. It was designed as a 6-meter rule to use between Europe and the US, and the US and Japan and Europe. So the whole idea was so you wouldn't miss people. If you were transmitting from east to west, you did one time segment, and then you did the opposite from the other location. It's a 6-meter thing. It doesn't really apply in HF as much as it does on 6 meters, but I just don't think it's taking an idea that worked really well when you had a very limited number of people trying to do it, and the numbers are just skyrocketed. The number of people that are operating this mode versus working weak signal VHF, UHF before.
Yeah, that's interesting to know. Yeah, because I mean, I was looking at it and stressing about trying to do the right thing, and people getting annoyed with me, and I thought, just hang on a minute, this doesn't work.
I would suggest you do it for 6 meters.
Yeah, sure.
That's where people follow the rule. And I do actually have in my full slide presentation, I do actually have that slide. I can bring it up here real quick and I can tell you what it is. This is my website, by the way. Are you seeing my website right now?
Yeah, we are. It's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the website, and under operating, there's a whole section on digital modes that has links to all the software I talked about, has links to all the different radio configurations.
That's great.
It has a link to the presentation. But the thing I wanted to on the presentation, I'll check real quick on the full presentation, because I have that map on here, the east versus west time slots. For some reason, I am having very laggy internet on one of my browsers, which is really strange to have it on one browser, not on the other one, but we'll bring it up here. There it is. Okay, so here's the suggestion. They're suggesting that if you're transmitting in Europe, that you use the even, and if you're transmitting from North America, you use the odd for Europe, North America contacts. If you're in North America and trying to work JAs, so basically the whole suggestion is the station further east uses the even and the station further west uses the odd. But again, this is for 6-meter intercontinental. It doesn't work if you want to work people in your own country, because then everyone would be on even, so no one would ever hear each other. The other thing that happens too is if 50.313 gets busy, there's an alternative of 50.323, which is suggested only for intercontinental use, not for domestic use. So you need to check that too. When 6 meters really kicks up, you want to check both sets of frequencies. But it makes it a little confusing. But follow the time sequencing for intercontinental 6-meter, but don't worry about it for anything else.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you.
Yeah, Anthony, I've sent out to everybody, and I'll post it up tomorrow as well, the links to your website and the full software you're just showing here.
Very good. And then I'm going to show you one other quick thing here real quick. I have a link on here for youth and students. So if anyone out there works with a lot of students, I have a page here that just has resources for that. That's one of my things that I work a lot with. It's right here. It's not going to come up right now because my page is not cooperating. My internet's not cooperating right now. But I have that. So, well, thank you very much. If there's any other questions.
Yeah, that was excellent, Anthony. Very good indeed. Before you disappear and before everyone else disappears, I was just going to very quickly just ask people on the call tonight how many people have used FT4 or FT8, just out of interest, for those of you on the call tonight. So just run a quick poll.
Yep.
Well, you can't get much even. You can't get over 50-50.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Now, if this was 6 months ago, that's the other question you should ask. How many people were doing this 6 months ago?
I have to say that 6 months ago, I hadn't been active for over 30 years. And I got into it, and I got into FT8, and I've had about 600 QSOs, worked 96 countries.
So
I'm
checking, just slightly less than 50-50 on that poll there.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. And my second question I was just going to put, if I can find it, or have I lost it? In a second. There we go. So those of you that have never tried it, would you now give it a try, having seen Anthony's demonstration this evening?
Go on, give it a go.
Could I ask him a quick question? I've just
go on, Gerald. You're far away. Yeah.
Can you ever use this method for making up a sked-on voice, so you can have a longer natter with somebody if you meet them on this on these modes? Or
You definitely could do that.
The thing is, though, Gerald, you can't exchange any information on there. So there's a thing called JS8 call, which I think Anthony talked about, where you can exchange some information.
Yes.
I'd like to get him to talk about the train, the engine who's behind him on the picture.
Looks fantastic. Is that a big boy?
That is a. Let me bring that up here real quick. I think I have it. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
While you're looking, Anthony, on the poll, 2/3 of people who answered said they would now give it a try. So quite interesting.
I recommend it. It's transformed my amateur radio life.
If you are living in an apartment like me with small antennas, this is the way to go. And the GS8 call is really something that I can recommend, because I had rack shoes for 2 hours with people in Thailand or in whatever. So
really,
yeah. You can really
That's
have
fantastic.
nice QSOs. It's like an RTTY, but it's slower. But
yeah, of course.
You can type your way, you know, and having a rack shoe with people all over the world. It's still not that much used, which is maybe a good thing, but it's interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Quite fancy that.
Yes. It's unbelievable. I'm using only 20 watt and some mobile whips on my balcony. That's all I have.
Well, so Bill, who you'll see if you use WSJT-X, Bill is one of the authors. He's a member of our club, and we have a Discord server, so we chat on there. And he reckons that the whole FT8 thing transforms a standard station, if you like, into what would have been one of the big guns with a linear and a beam from 10 years ago.
Yeah. We have here a very old member who is in a elderly home. How do you call that in England? An elderly home, a daycare, no, a care center. And he got permission to put a small antenna on his balcony, and he is working. He was a CW operator before, but he's so happy he can now still have some QSOs. So for him, it's 83 years old. It's magic to him.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's magic to him.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So for the railroad aficionados out there, on my webpage, there is a railroad link right here.
Yeah.
And then this is the railroad that I volunteer on, the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad. Now the engine is a nickel plate Berkshire. We don't have that. That comes in for 3 weekends a year from Indiana. We have an agreement with the Fort Wayne group that maintains this. We don't have steam on our railroad any longer. We only have diesel locomotives, but this comes in, usually it would have been here these last 3 weekends, but we have not had, the railroad's been closed because of COVID. They're reopening for limited service starting next month, but we didn't get to have our steam in the Valley weekend that we normally have.
Well, that's a shame.
I'll tell you what, Anthony, I went onto your website yesterday because I knew you were coming on here, and I did tell my girlfriend, I said, well, you know, he says he's into amateur radio, railways and maps, and she said, you should get along with him very well then.
Here's the other thing I'm into also.
Oh yeah, cooking. Sorry, you did say cooking too, and that was one of the 4 things. Yeah, absolutely.
So like those old TV shows, game shows that you heard before, we have a parting gift for everyone today. I have a small cookbook available for you from the website that you can download. It's a small, it's a small family cookbook of Italian cooking and
nice
variety of things. So you can download that little PDF cookbook.
Yeah. My wife will love that. I will get some good points from my wife now.
This is why you need JS8 call. You can be talking recipes on here.
Actually, the guy in Hong Kong, he was baking bread with sourdough. My wife is also into that, so we exchanged some recipes. He was a German guy living there, so we exchanged some recipes.
Well, my sourdough is downstairs at the moment. Yeah.
Great. My wife just cooked some pancakes with that.
My wife and I got a chance to travel around England in 1991.
Changed a bit.
The Glasgow Club was having their Cultural Capital of Europe 1990.
Oh, yes.
They had a contest that you entered, and I won the prize for the trip to Scotland.
Wow.
And we then spent time traveling around the UK. The closest we got, basically, we really didn't go through your area exactly, because we went down through York on the East Coast, and then we went back up on the West Coast, and we went back up again. But we did get a chance to travel around a little bit. And I got to go to their club meeting one night, and that was the first time I had ever attended a club meeting outside the United States. And I realized that everyone at the club was the same people as our radio club here. They just have different names. There's the same personalities, the same group of people, and it was fun. But we got to do that, so that was our chance. And we were planning on doing a trip this last year, but then with things changing, we haven't got a chance to do that. So we are still planning on a trip in the near future now that we're both retired of coming back.
The thing is, Anthony, it's not just amateur radio that everybody is exactly the same. It's anything. So I'm also into home brewing beer, and
samples.
Yeah, I work in Denmark, and the guys there, I'm a member of a home brewing club to do with my company in Denmark. They're exactly the same bunch of people.
I have a very good friend who's a home brewer, and he brought me to his club meeting one time, and I was all excited because he does an excellent job. And then I found out that not all the members of his club were all good at brewing. He warned me about a few people not to try there.
Yeah.
So Anthony, I must show you. This is. I'm just going to show you the railway bridge here.
Yes, I've been looking at a number of pictures of that. That's very impressive.
It's about 400 yards away from where I live. I live right next door to the station, and that bridge is, you know, literally. I walk down the road. And that's what I'm looking at. There was a big accident in about.
And on the same line, there's the Denby Dale Viaduct as well.
Yeah. What is that, Nick? Is that still extant?
It's a single line, so it's a single track. And it runs from Sheffield to Huddersfield.
Still in use?
It's still in use, yeah. Yeah, we have 2 trains an hour on it.
Wow.
Running about 20 miles an hour.
Impressive.
It sometimes goes faster than that, Nick, and it's like a ride on a fairground when it starts trying to gain speed. There's also the Denby Dale and the Lockwood Viaduct on that same line as well.
Denby Dale's got a very similar bridge like that coming into it. 100 years ago at this very spot, there was an accident, and a train came off, got derailed, and literally collapsed into the parkland beneath. So that must have been some job to have removed that train.
Yeah, fantastic.
Anyway, Anthony, I just want to say thank you very much for your talk tonight. It was absolutely fascinating. And
if you have 1 more minute, I have one more little railroad.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, go on.
My wife and I, in 2007, we took the Amtrak around we did a trip all the way around the United States, and I actually tied radio into it too, because we went to from our house we went to Cleveland to Chicago, and then out to Glacier National Park in Montana, and I operated field day from Glacier National Park that year on the train. And then we went out to the West Coast, down the West Coast, across the south of the United States, and then back home. We did a 15-day trip around the United States on the train. And our children, whenever we go, our grown children, whenever we're planning our vacation, they want to know what train is involved and what amateur radio is involved in our trip. So if you ever get a chance to come to the United States, I can tell you all the good scenic railroad spots to visit here in the U.S. Well, thank you very much. It's been very enjoyable. You now have to, when you see me on FT8, you have to double click and give me a contact.
Well, vice versa.
Yeah, brilliant, Anthony. Thank you very much indeed. That was a really good presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and show our appreciation in them away, guys, while we're all here, and Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you,
okay, yeah, thanks, Anthony, and I'm glad we got there in the end with UTC, and we got you on the call, so brilliant.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, someone's got a call. That's you.
That's your end, Anthony, isn't it?
Yeah, he's gone.
Yeah.
No, it's tremendous, wasn't it, that, Nick? I was really fascinated by the way the thing